Dr. Fischler, it's easy to talk about the need for change, but how do you make change actually happen? How do you get there?
Well, let me try to give you a schematic, a strategy, but understand two major things: time and cost. This is not something that you can do in one day. The illustration I'll compare it to is what the banking community did from the time I was a young man to where we are today. Remember, in banking, when I started out in life, there was bankers' hours. It was from 10 to 2 in the morning, and the banks people had to go to their bank to do banking, and you had a little booklet, and you went to an NCR, and they put the interest on, and when you made a deposit or withdrawal, they put it into the machine and you did it. But you can only do it between 10 and 2. Then the war came along, World War II came along, and we were operating on a 24-hour system, and the banks were forced to change. So they changed the banking hours so that those who got paid on Friday could go to the bank. So the banking started to stay open. Then you became technologically oriented, and therefore what happened was they now have created a banking system where you can go to any branch bank, because all the information is centralized on a computer, and you can bank 24/7 through the ATMs, and you can bank by mail. Now all of that, and by computers, so all of that has changed the whole banking structure. Well, we have to do the same in education. Teachers work very hard in order to try to educate the students, but they can't have 30 lessons and go home at night and help each child within their responsibility. So we have to move from the class, which enabled them to have 3 reading groups for an hour, and then 2 math groups, and then they had projects for social studies and science, but they almost didn't have any time to teach science unless they got into the middle school and the high school, because the elementary school teacher was not a science teacher. Most of them didn't like science, and most of them didn't really like math, but they were forced to teach math. But science they kind of read about. And so science became kind of like a story and not a project-oriented verb, which is what science is. Science is a verb and not a noun. So let me walk you through a cube, which enables me to project the various components, but remember, cost and time.
So, just sorry to interrupt you, but the components for bringing about educational change.
The components that bring about educational change over time,
Okay.
at a cost. We talked about taking the student as the class. That's where we want to go. We want to be able to help every student succeed. So we now want to have time as a variable and mastery at a certain level for all students. So if we use the FCAT Florida test as an example, from 1 to 5, we want every student to at least get a 3. Now, how do we know they're ready to get a 3? We know what they're doing because we use the self-paced mode, and the student then proceeds module by module through the self-paced mode. And the teacher acts as a guide and provides the student the opportunity and the support and the motivation to continue to learn. And every time the child finishes one of these, they get a smiling face, which they can take home. And therefore the parent knows that the child has finished a module and passed the requirements in that module and is going on. Now this is a continuum for the student.
In what respect? Sorry.
Education is a continuous process for individual students. And I want to build an environment which reinforces the positives, because I don't know where every student ought to be at the exact period of time. But I do know on the continuum where every student is, because I have a management system as one of the components that have to be in place. We have to know where every child is on the CAI approach. And since this is a continuum, and using the computer as a tool of learning, we know where every child is. And therefore the appropriate material comes to that child when the child is doing English or mathematics. Now, we also want the child to read, but not always in this mode. We want the child to be able to read books and magazines and things of that nature, and so we want the child to do research. So we have a tutorial mode. It's where 2 or 3 children are working on a project-based curriculum, and they share responsibility for the solving of a problem, hopefully a problem which is of interest to them, based on some way of organizing the program. So the child then is put into a tutorial mode where the computer is used as a research tool, and where they have to read and analyze and synthesize and do all of those higher level skills which have to be developed in addition to comprehension, which is developed in the small units within the self-paced mode. And finally, these students end up using the computer as a communication tool because they work with one another using e-learning or email and other kinds of things, or the computer is used to produce PowerPoint presentations so that they can present what they've learned. They present to the group in a PowerPoint presentation. So they're communicating to the group the information they acquired in this particular mode by utilizing the languages which they picked up in this mode. Now, that's the modes of instruction. Rarely do we expect to see the teacher teaching the group as a whole. But it's not rare that we see the students interacting and making their presentations to the group as a whole group. So they're sharing what they're learning with their peers. So it's good to have a topic that allows for that to occur. And that's where the creative curriculum gets built by teachers. This piece, you buy it because it's done in a very costly, difficult manner, and it's presented through the computer to each child when the child is ready to receive that bit on a continuum.